There's no way around it anymore. The Ben Simmons situation is officially untenable. After stinking up the joint in yet another playoff series, the Philadelphia 76ers and their fans have soured on Ben to the point of no return. Simmons and his agent Rich Paul know this and are now in a standoff with the organization. Simmons won't report to training camp and he's vocalized that he's also done with the Sixers, even threatening to sit out during the season until he gets traded. So with both the team and the player vocally done with each other, this seems like a no-brainer to trade the disgruntled star. The problem? Ben just signed a max contract the year before, which will limit the number of suitors for the 24-year-old. So yes, both Philly and Simmons want to move on from each other, but the logistics are going to be hard to navigate. We may very well start the season with Simmons still on the Sixers, but not present with the team. It's a tricky situation that at this point is just sad on many accounts. But how did it get to this point? Who's more to blame for letting it get to this? And where do we go from here? There's a lot to unpack in this drama-filled saga, so let's get to unpacking. Real quick, before we start, make sure to subscribe to my channel by clicking that red button and ringing the bell to stay notified for more videos. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to give this video a like, and while you're here, feel free to check out my last video I made on the Toronto Blue Jays' rise to contention. And without further ado, let's get started. Back in 2016, the 76ers were in the midst of a tank job the likes the NBA has never seen before. From 2013 to 2016, the team had the worst record in the league, thanks to then GM Sam Hinkie shredding veteran contracts and aiming for high lottery picks. This intense rebuilding strategy, dubbed the process, was intended to lift the team out of mediocrity into contention through several painfully bad years of basketball that would give them cheaper controllable talent via the draft lottery. Hinkie's process, for the most part, did exactly what it intended to. From 2013 to 2017, the 76ers sucked. And in turn, in 4 straight drafts, they got a top 3 pick. 2 of them turned out to be duds, while the other 2 were the foundational pieces they'd hoped they'd find. The first great pick they used was in the 2014 draft on Joel Embiid, who quickly embraced the process moniker as his own. After Embiid missed the first 2 years of his career due to injuries, Philly got the rights to the first overall pick in 2016. In that draft, the consensus number 1 pick was Ben Simmons. The 6'11" Australian guard was seen as a can't-miss prospect. After going one and done at LSU, he had every team eager to land him. He could rebound and block like a center, and pass and steal like a point guard. His versatility was so intriguing and was the reason why, despite his weaknesses, he was a surefire number 1 pick for so many. He had the frame of LeBron James, the height of Lamar Odom, and the passing IQ of Magic Johnson, all 3 players he was compared to before he even entered the league. That one weakness coming into the draft though was a big one, his perimeter and free throw shooting. As a one-and-done freshman at LSU, he only shot 33% from downtown and 67% from the line. Those numbers aren't pretty, but surely he'd be able to figure that part of his game down the line. Add to that some attitude and character questions, and he wasn't infallible as a prospect. Regardless, his upside was too big to not take him first overall. So after selecting Simmons, the Sixers thought they had the final piece in the rebuilding process. Him and Embiid would dominate the NBA together for 15 years, lead the Sixers to many championships, and Simmons would turn into the LeBron clone many thought he could be. Well, Ben's immediate development was put on hold before he even got to play his first pro game, as he suffered an ankle fracture in training camp that sidelined him the whole year. It was highly disappointing for Philly, as they just got Embiid cleared to play for his first season after missing the first 2 years due to nagging injuries. But the following year, Simmons returned in full force. He silenced the doubters en route to a Rookie of the Year win, averaging 16, 8, and 8 along with 1.7 steals and 1 block on 54, 0, and 56 shooting splits. Wait, did I read that right? 54, 0, and 56? I mean, 54% from the field is pretty good, and he still averaged a damn near triple-double as a rookie. But 0% from 3 and 56% from the line? Ugh, he's really gonna have to figure out that part of his game if he ever really wants to succeed in the league. Regardless of those shooting concerns, his rookie year was without a doubt a success. He showed glimpses of his massive potential as a playmaker, rebounder, and especially a defender. If he could just pick up a reliable mid-range and develop his 3-point and free throw shots, then he really could be one of the best players in the league one day. And even with its offensive flaws, the team was already doing well in large part because of Ben's influence. In his first year with the team, the Sixers made the playoffs as a 3rd seed in the East with a 52-30 record. And although they lost in the second round, in only their first year playing together, Embiid and Simmons showed just why Hinkie tanked and why fans trusted the process. So coming into his second year, expectations were sky high for Simmons and the Sixers. They finally had a winning roster after 4 straight tragic seasons. All they needed was for Embiid and Simmons to keep on improving, and Embiid did just that as he shot his numbers up from 23-11-3 to 28-14-4. Meanwhile, Simmons improved his scoring up 1 point, his rebounds up 1, and even got his free throw shooting up to 60%. But still, his shooting splits came out to 56, 0, and 60 on the season. While his improvement in free throw shooting was encouraging, it was only marginal, and at this point, his lack of even attempting three-pointers was disconcerting. He was gaining the reputation of a bricklayer, slowly but surely cementing that status. As a team, the Sixers were once again the 3rd seed and once again reached the 2nd round. This time though, they were literally a few bounces away from beating the eventual champion Raptors. Who knows, maybe if Kawhi doesn't hit that shot, the Sixers could have been NBA champs and we'd all look at Simmons differently. Please try not to cry, Philly fans. While it was an utterly deflating defeat for the team, they still had a promising young core. But again, it was on the 2 first-time All-Stars to fully develop their games and take the team to unforeseen heights. I think it was at this point though that many people began to look at Ben differently. Heading into the offseason, Simmons posted one of his now famous yearly workout videos in which he was draining threes on a consistent basis. The videos provided hope for Sixers fans that he would actually try out the shot during games and not just in workouts. Because in basketball nowadays, if you're a point guard and don't have at least an average jump shot, then your ceiling is pretty limited. And that's what was the most frustrating thing about Simmons. He wouldn't even try to shoot. There are plenty of videos showing him in high school knocking down jumpers with ease. But for whatever reason, he lost his confidence in his jumper and started to focus on all other aspects of his game. Those other parts of his game are what makes Simmons a unique talent, but without that jumper, he can never be that dominant offensive force that many people thought he'd become. So without that offensive game, he turned to the defense and made himself an elite defender, one of the best in the league. In 2020, he made his first all-defensive first team, as well as all-NBA third team. He showed that he was a versatile defender capable of guarding positions 1 through 5. He even led the league in steals with the career-high 2.1 and was an overall pest. And guess what? That season, he even did the impossible. He made his first career 3. That bumped his shooting split for 2020 up to 58, 28, and 62, all career highs. Even though it was Simmons' best year to date, the team as a whole suffered. They limped to a 6th place finish in the East before the pandemic cut the season short. In the bubble, Simmons got injured and missed the entire first round series against the Celtics, one in which they got swept. Whatever his shortcomings were though, coming into this past year, Simmons had a pretty decorated resume. 2 straight All-Star appearances, an All-NBA spot, and a first-team All-Defense are nothing to sneeze at. With that sort of resume, one can see why the Sixers did what they did. In order to lock up one of their young stars, Philly gave Simmons a 5-year, $177 million max contract. His average salary would come up to $35 million per year, which is a lot of dough. But Philly thought that they were getting a top 3 defensive player and a guy who could hopefully turn his offensive game around. And once again, Ben had another good year, with an All-Star appearance, as well as a first-team All-Defense, and even a runner-up spot for Defensive Player of the Year. But on the offensive side, he regressed in almost every aspect. His 14 points and 7 assists were career lows, and his shooting splits were 56, 15, and 60. It seemed like he was regressing as a scorer, and his diminishing shots per game were proof of that. Maybe it was because of Embiid's surge into MVP contention. Maybe he was in his own head. Or maybe it was a mixture of both. Coming into these past playoffs though, his previous letdowns were highlighted as proof of someone who becomes a liability in the biggest games. In 2018, he posted a respectable 16, 10, and 8 on 12.5 shots in 10 games as a rookie, even shooting 71% from the free throw line. But in 2019, his stats regressed to the tune of 14, 7, and 6 on 9.7 shots in 12 games. His field goal percentage went up to 62%, but his free throw percentage dipped all the way down to 57%. So after no playoffs in 2020, all of his demons came to a head in the 2021 playoffs. After a lackluster first round series against the Wizards, Ben and the Sixers were tasked with handling the upstart Hawks. And handle them they did not, losing in a 7-game upset. The biggest reason for the upset loss? You guessed it. In a 7-game series, Ben's numbers plummeted to a pathetic 10, 9, and 6 stat line on only 6.4 shot attempts, 60% shooting, and a measly 33% from the free throw line. That level of offensive ineptitude in the playoffs is astounding, especially for a guy on a max contract. I mean, I could get not shooting threes since that's his thing, but 33% from the line and only 10 points on 6 attempts? That's miserable. At that point, he was just afraid to even shoot the ball. His horrible playoff showing culminated in a Game 7 at home when in the 4th quarter he had a wide open layup on Trae Young, and instead of yamming it on his head, he passed to Matisse Thybulle, who was already covered. That play alone drew groans from the Philly crowd who were growing tired of his antics. I mean, was Simmons that scared to get fouled that he passed up on a wide open shot in Game 7 of a playoff series? And it didn't help that it was basically like this for every fourth quarter in that series. In 7 games, Simmons only attempted 3 field goals in the fourth, going 2 for 2 in Game 1 and 1 for 1 in Game 3. Games 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 0 for 0. Not even a single shot attempt in the fourth for 4 straight games. That is something you'd expect from a bench player, not your maxed out point guard. And that's when you knew he was toast. It wasn't just one game, it was a whole series. At that point, it's no longer an anomaly, it's a disturbing trend. So after yet another year of no offensive improvement and more playoff failures, it seems that Philly is done with Ben. And I really don't blame them. When you pay a man max money just for them not to improve their offensive game year after year and to wet the bed on the biggest stage, I'd move on from them too. The only thing they ask from Ben is to develop a jump shot. It's been 5 years and he's made no progression on that. To me, that just reeks of arrogance, that you don't think you need to improve on your most glaring weakness and that everything is just gonna be alright. I mean, just look at this chart from 2020 for Simmons' shots outside of 6 feet. With the lack of attempts and makes, that is appalling to look at. This chart just shows why, time and time again in the playoffs, his weakness has been exploited and the Sixers have faced the consequences. At this point, if Philly ever wants to win a championship, it'll have to be with Embiid and someone else, because the two of them cannot coexist, especially with Simmons being an offensive liability anywhere outside of the paint. Ben needs his own team to run point center if he ever wants to reach his full potential, and he won't be able to do that alongside Joel. So honestly, it would be a win-win scenario for Simmons and the Sixers if he got dealt. The biggest obstacle for this trade remains Simmons' contract. Not many teams will be able to take on a max contract that has 4 years left on it, especially for a player as flawed as him. They'll need to find a team that A, has a cap space to take on Ben, and B, doesn't have a center that will clog the paint. Aside from a few teams, like the Spurs or Kings, who fit both criteria, there isn't much else available at the moment. In the end, I do think that Simmons and the Sixers will work out a trade when it's all said and done, but they should be prepared to let the standoff drag into training camp and beyond, because the number of suitors out there are limited. And for Simmons, he has to come to the realization that this situation is all on him. If he had shown initiative in improving his offensive game, then he wouldn't be an outcast. But he didn't, and Philly has every right to move on from a guy who refuses to work on his game. All in all, the Simmons situation is a reminder that sometimes our expectations can never match reality. The expectation was that Ben would improve upon his shortcomings and become a top 10 player in the NBA. That is not the reality, but it doesn't mean it can never be. Simmons is still only 25, and most players' peaks come in their late 20s to their early 30s. But with the track record he's given us over the past 5 years of showing a lack of improvement is very troubling, and I personally wouldn't count on him to all of a sudden be a capable shooter. And that's why I don't blame the Sixers for wanting to cut bait and move on. Perhaps Simmons is what he is at this point, a bigger Draymond Green. And that's not a bad thing, as Green is an NBA champ and an integral part of the Warriors dynasty. But Ben has a lot to prove if he even wants to be mentioned in the same breath as Draymond. I really do hope he can at least reach that part of his ceiling for his sake, because he does have so many other tools like his passing and tremendous defense. But I think it's time we give up hope that he'll become something that he's not offensively and start accepting that this may be his reality, because even the Sixers have already done that.